Day 1118 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 895,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,210 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 19 tanks, 11 APVs, 37 artillery, and 1 multiple launch rocket system. Then headed to the map, because in a further act of winged consistency, another wave of one-way attack drones could be seen and heard flying over the borders into Russia overnight. Firstly, it was reported that a military clinic had caught fire down in Vladikavkaz, and is a lesser-known location that is very close to the borders with Georgia. Following that event, a fire occurred on the left bank in the city of Rostov overnight, as per local media reports. Cause unspecified, but occurred in close proximity to the town's industrial sector, which also houses an oil depot. Then moving east across to Russia's Astrakhan region, where, according to the governor of the region, Ukrainian drones attacked an infrastructure object, with the governor also claiming that debris fell on a facility, after which a fire broke out. He also added that, and this line sounds like it comes directly from the official Kremlin-approved list of talking points, quote, "The situation is under control." Then we'll head across to the far northwest of Kursk, to Zelenzogorsk, where representatives of the negotiating drone party were inbound, with local residents indicating they heard more than 40 explosions. The target of these Ukrainian UAVs could have likely been a mining and processing plant nearby. Also noting that this and other events genuinely make you wonder how ineffective must Russia's anti-aircraft systems be for Ukraine to conduct aerial operations in broad daylight, or even morning skylight in this case. The very act of flying across those Mother Russia territories, with the example of Astrakhan mentioned just a moment ago, flying over 700 kilometers unobstructed, is an impressive feat in itself. Then to an official update on the Kursk theatre, as Ukraine's general staff has now confirmed the orderly withdrawal from the city of Sudzha. Posting the latest battlefield maps on social media, the general staff showed Ukrainian troops' withdrawal from the logistics hub of Sudzha, noting it occurred days after Moscow claimed its capture. But now to a Russian summary of events in Kursk, taking a look at their Ministry of Defense claims of Ukrainian losses in the old salient, where they claim the following: over 66,000 AFU casualties, 392 tanks, and over 3,000 armoured personnel vehicles destroyed, when combining infantry fighting vehicles, armoured personnel carriers, and armoured fighting vehicles. The Russian MOD may as well have thrown in a few hundred T-800 Terminators and X-Wing fighters as well. It's a real head-scratcher. Take, for instance, the claim of 392 tanks. This figure suggests not only a substantial armoured force, but also an assertion of having destroyed more enemy tanks than the combined operational totals of each of the largest Western European armies, the UK, Germany, and France. Then there's the claimed whopping 3,000 plus armoured personnel vehicles destroyed. 3,500. A claim that is just obscenely unrealistic, especially given that the vast majority of these AFU-operated armoured vehicles have superior protections against their Russian analogues. Then also, according to the Russian MOD, the entirety of Kursk-positioned Ukrainian forces were destroyed multiple times over, with the claim of nearly 67,000 casualties. Strange indeed, given that, at their peak, the AFU had less than 25,000 troops in the region. Now, during the first 6 months of the full-scale SMO invasion, Russia claimed at that time to have downed 330 jets and 180 helicopters of the Ukrainian Air Force, which was in fact a claim that far exceeded Ukraine's operational count back then, which stood at around 60 jets and 80 helicopters, roughly 3 times less than what Russia had suggested. So it's this prevailing theme of a 3-to-1 ratio we've heard on a good number of occasions now, and bearing in mind, Russia is not simply claiming to have eliminated 3 times the actual figure, instead they're claiming to have eliminated 3 times everything that Ukraine has operational, that has largely not been destroyed. Classic Russian propaganda, which likely serves primarily as morale-boosting narratives aimed at their own internal audience. Then headed down the map, the Kharkiv region, where Ukrainian FPV drone operators destroyed Russian positions near the Oskil River. Reportedly, those lost positions were part of small Russian gains, followed by the loss within the space of just a few short hours at a frontline village. As for the AFU in this sector, they were reported to have advanced a small amount near Krylykivka, meaning we might expect to see an update on the map soon if they held position. Then headed across to nearby bordering Luhansk, where in a sudden attack, Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade gained control of the Nadia and Novohorivka villages. And it's an event that also serves as a fresh reminder that Russian forces do not control all of Luhansk. They did, once upon a time, but after losing 60,000 square kilometers as part of their previous withdrawals from Sumy, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, Mykolaiv, Chernihiv, and Luhansk, their army is still playing catch-up to their own former glory, to the tune of about 50,000 square kilometers plus. And who knows, maybe they're dead set on reoccupying Chernobyl and walking through the adjacent Red Forest, again, kicking up the radioactive soil dust of cesium-137, among other radionuclides. But even more reckless, some Russian soldiers back then dug trenches and set up encampments directly in the Red Forest's soil, which is saturated with radioactive isotopes. Drone footage and satellite imagery later confirmed these activities, showing disturbed earth and defensive positions in one of the most radioactive parts of the zone. It really sets my sphincter off just thinking about it. Then headed across to Toretsk, where the Ukrainian counter-attacking forces were noted in the northwest, but also punching into the southern west ends of the ruins of this town in a concerted effort to close off positions of the invader forces. Of note, the UAS battalion of the 12th Special Purpose Brigade, Azov, displayed a mixture of their drone warfare activity, both inside and outside of the city, with all of these activities continuing to speak to Russia's concentration of troops up in the Kursk and other northern border areas, which has severely impacted their own assault operations within eastern Ukraine. In fact, just north of here, at Chasiv Yar, Russian positions remain largely unchanged for about 2 months, with sources that indicated at that time Russia became increasingly determined to seize the Ukrainian-held town of Constantinople, but first needed to take Chasiv Yar in order to do so. However, the Russian MOD's early and inaccurate claims of capturing Toretsk, likely due to falsified reports up the chain of command, led to a disaster, pulling their available forces up north from Toretsk and then back down south to Toretsk to continue the campaign of its unfinished capture. The entire situation is now one symptomatic of a military with increasingly stretched resources. Then headed down the map to the Constantinople axis with a great deal of activity witnessed, but not a great deal in the way of contact point line changes. The AFU continues to make it very painful for opposing forces to move west of their current locations, and it's a reminder of how this was one of the regions where Russian mill bloggers a few weeks back complained about the quality of the replenishment troops provided for their offensives, which included a combination of untrained and disabled soldiers, where you would presume that the disabled soldiers, including those seen on crutches, were previously wounded in action, followed by being sent back to the front lines all bandaged up. Though given the Russian sources on this, not bandaged up well enough. Then headed back to the Kherson region today, where military sailors are harassing the Russians on the Kinburn Spit, which is adjacent to the Kherson right bank and Mykolaiv, where it was seen elements of the AFU were taking out enemy equipment that really ran the risk of relocating itself there. An extremely vulnerable location. Then to the map more generally today, as the air defense forces of Ukraine repelled a large Shahed drone attack overnight. Out of the 174 Shahed drones launched across Ukraine, with a disproportionate focus on the capital, 90 drones were shot down and another 70 were lost in location, presumably due to electronic warfare countermeasures. Now to take a look at multiple European countries on the map, including Hungary, Serbia, and Romania, where recent events have sparked significant public reactions. In Hungary, several thousands protested against Prime Minister Viktor Orban following his controversial statements about the EU and Ukraine, with opposition leader Peter Magyar, who is currently surpassing Orban in the polls, declaring in Russian to Orban, "It's over, comrade," thus speaking in a language he might understand during a rally organised by the Teaser opposition party amid growing anti-Orban sentiment. Then in Serbia, the capital Belgrade saw an unprecedented amount of people flooding the streets in what was said to be hundreds of thousands as part of the country's largest ever anti-government protests against President Vučić, prompting police to deploy LRAD sonic cannons and disperse the crowds, with Vučić addressing the nation accusing external forces of orchestrating the unrest and threatening a harsh response to any lawbreakers as tensions continue to escalate. Then in Romania, many thousands gathered in Bucharest for the Euro Manifest meeting to show support for Romania's EU membership and to oppose Russian interference in the presidential elections following the permanent ban of a pro-Russian candidate. These powerful displays of civic engagement across Eastern Europe demonstrates that citizens remain willing to take to the streets and raise their voices when democracy is threatened. Then to some more news. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz revealed that Ukraine will receive unspecified security guarantees in exchange for territorial concessions. He also stated that the US is considering the, quote, reality of the situation on the ground in ongoing diplomatic talks to end the war. This phrase raises concerns, as it directly echoes Russian narratives suggesting Russia is to achieve or be rewarded even with whatever land they have captured in their military campaign against Ukraine. However, such a move seems improbable among European allies. Unlikely they'll go for that. Then also, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized that the immediate priority of the White House administration is achieving a ceasefire in Ukraine. He outlined a two-phase approach to ending the war. Phase A focuses on establishing a ceasefire, while Phase B aims to convene all parties for negotiations, seeking a lasting resolution that respects everyone's interests. Rubio did, however, acknowledge that the second phase will be challenging, but stressed that progress cannot be made without first achieving the initial ceasefire. The very same ceasefire Putin is holding hostage while attempting to extract impossible preemptive concessions ahead of formal negotiations to end the war. But then as for a further US angle, President Trump reportedly has a scheduled phone call with Russian President Putin tomorrow, March 18, aimed to end the war in Ukraine. He announced the potential pivot point in US foreign policy while en route from Florida to Washington on Air Force One. However, the conversation promises to be contentious. Trump mentioned he would be discussing land and power plants in a conversation with Putin, framing it as a dividing up of certain assets. This signals yet another approach that raises concerns among European allies, seemingly undermining Ukraine's sovereignty and peace efforts, straining relations with those European partners. But ultimately, it's always difficult to predict the outcome of these upcoming events. The Trump-Putin conversation may settle in a stalemate, or even with a 10% chance that it could erupt into an explosive dialogue. Then to Turkey, who is taking a firm stance on the Ukraine conflict on the 11th anniversary of the illegal Crimean referendum. Turkey's foreign ministry declared non-recognition of the annexation, reaffirming support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Turkish President Erdogan recently backed Trump's peace initiatives, expressing optimism for a resolution under his leadership. Turkey has consistently condemned Russia's aggression, calling for negotiations, but Turkey's stance is not just diplomatic. Erdogan aims to prevent Moscow from turning the Black Sea into a Russian lake, and as such, asserting Turkey's influence in the region. That's a good Turkey. So that has to be it for today, guys. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the comments, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!